All right, cool. Well, thank you, too, for being here on this exciting Sunday. But since we're doing so much new things, it's a new year, new name, we decided let's have more new things, right? And we're starting this new series. And we're calling this Going Against the Grain. And what this series is really going to do is it's going to walk through the book of Daniel. And the reason why we're doing this is because regardless of what our name is, regardless of what we call this church, at the end of the day, we're here simply because we just want to worship God as a community. And as your church, we just want to help equip as many people as we can with everything that they need to follow God and to serve God in this world. And so my hope while I'm up here is for us every weekend to just see that the gospel is true and that it's amazing. But one of the questions that I get asked the most, or the conversations that I end up having more often than any other, is people just asking in one way or another, how is it that we go about living as Christians in a world that's full of not Christians? Like Jesus, we believe, is the true Son of God. He's the King of the world, but it's also definitely true that most of the people around us in this world aren't very much interested in following Jesus. And that's not just a new phenomenon of the world that we live in right now. Like all throughout the scriptures, when we read the history books of the Bible, it's just simply been true. The people of God have constantly had to navigate what it looks like following God in a world that's not so interested. And what's so interesting about the book of Daniel, as we'll see, is Daniel is a man who came from the family of God. He's an Israelite who is captured from his homeland, is taken to Babylon, and is forced to serve underneath a king. And what's so interesting about Daniel is that he is actually faithful in his service to this foreign king, to this king who is evil. But yet he also never compromises in the way in which he is also faithful to God. And I think as we go through it, we're just going to find very interesting themes and lessons on how we today can live in a world that doesn't want to be Christian, that might even be anti-Christian, but yet we can go and be people of God. And be people of God in such a way that we actually advance his mission and glorify him so that the world can't help but see how good he is. So what do you think? Is this worth listening to? Is this something we want? All right, well, let's get started. So we're going to read Daniel. So if you have a Bible, you can turn one on, you can open one up, and we're just going to start in chapter 1, verse 1, and I'll read it aloud. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hands with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate and of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time they were to stand before the king. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar. Hananiah he called Shadrach. Mishael he called Meshach. And Azariah he called Abednego. Wasn't that exciting? So this is actually a really important piece of this book. This is setting the scene for the story that we're about to journey through. See, Jerusalem was a sovereign nation, and Nebuchadnezzar just brought his army and destroyed it. And so that seemed really quick and dry and boring, but you have to remember, like, sometimes the Bible doesn't give us these details because it's just assuming we're going to fill it in. But the truth is, Nebuchadnezzar just brought his army to a foreign nation. He besieged it. He closed down their walls so that they couldn't function until they had no choice but to submit and bow down to this foreign king. He entered the city and he destroyed it. Daniel, without a doubt, watched people that he loved, whether they were family or friends, die. He watched his city, he watched homes burn. And while the place was still smoking, he was inspected and taken captive and then transported to another land where he was to be re-educated. Here's what the Hebrews taught you, but this is the history you really need to know. This is how things really went. Yeah, you speak Hebrew, but not anymore. Now you speak the language of the Chaldeans. You speak Babylonian. Daniel isn't your name anymore. You're a Belteshazzar. Think of the traumatic experience that Daniel has just gone through. That's what the beginning of Daniel right here is trying to tell us. Something absolutely crazy has happened. The nation of God has fallen. Nebuchadnezzar and his army went into the temple of God and stole what was in there and took it to their own temple. And they did this to show your God bows down to ours. Everything that they believed in Jerusalem is being shaken. Everything they loved is being taken from them. This is a time of despair. This is a time of anguish. And Daniel, he's part of the royal family. He's nobility. He's supposed to be the safest. His life has probably been the most privileged. And yet, like an animal, he was inspected and deemed, you know what, you're actually one of the good ones. We like you, so we're going to take you. And so not only has he watched people he loved probably die, not only has he watched his city likely burn, he now has to go and not only live with his enemies, but he's now going to have every part of his life flipped upside down so that he can now serve the king that made this happen. This is the beginning of Daniel. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Because notice, what's interesting is Nebuchadnezzar, all throughout Daniel, is going to be painted as an evil king, as a ruthless king, as a king that sets himself up as God. And God is constantly going to have to put this guy in his place. He's not a good guy. But yet, he does something incredibly generous. Which isn't this how our world often works? The people that are the worst to us can also at times be the people who are the best to us. So he takes Daniel, everything that I just said, all this terrible stuff, but Daniel gets taken into the palace, and he's actually given an okay life, right? No one eats better than the king, right? In 600 BC, I promise you, no one eats better than the king. And to get to eat from the king's table is one, not just an act of generosity, but an act of kindness and honor. And so Daniel may have been taken from his home, but Nebuchadnezzar is making it clear, like, I've taken you to serve me, but you are certainly going to serve me as nobility still. He has big plans for him. And Daniel says, I actually don't want any part of that. Therefore, he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself, and God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and your drink. For why should he see that you are in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king. Just remember, this is not America. If you look the king in the face and you say no, you die. And we're going to learn, Nebuchadnezzar, if you say no to him, you're going to die, and the rest of your family's probably going to burn as well. Nebuchadnezzar is not a nice guy. And the guy in charge of Daniel is saying, what in the world are you trying to do to me? Then Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, "Test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you. And deal with your servants according to what you see." So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables. Now, oftentimes when I'm up here, it's not uncommon for me to read something in the Bible that's weird and explain, thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago, whenever it was, this may sound weird to us now, but it wasn't so weird back then. You get in the context and the culture and things, and you say, okay, maybe that's not so weird. It makes a little bit more sense. This is still weird. A diet of vegetables and water rather than eating from the king's table, I don't care if it's 600 BC or 2023, that's weird. Why in the world would you do this? And the guy in charge, that's what he's saying, is one, you're risking my life. The king gave me a direct order, and you're asking me to defy it? You're trying to get me killed? I don't think so. And Daniel says, well, just test it. After 10 days of me and my friends just eating vegetables and water, rather than the food at the king's table, we're going to be better off. And that's what happens. And what's interesting is not only are they better off and the steward is able to recognize this, he then actually defies the king's order for everyone. Everyone now has to eat this diet, right? Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, but that's what they're thinking, I promise you. But why in the world did he do this? We're going to finish off the chapter before we end, but I want to pause here because this section right here, as we begin to read Daniel, I think is the most important part for today's reading, and it's going to start to begin to highlight two themes that are become prevalent as we go through Daniel. And it all has to do with this question of why did Daniel do this? So it tells us that he didn't want to defile himself, right? And if you're a Bible nerd, if you've read into this, then there's a couple things that people might say about why. Some people say, well, it could have been because, the Torah was really important to Jews. You had to follow God a certain way. God said, I'm king, this is how you follow me, and he had his own law. And for one reason or another, that Torah entailed not just how to treat people well and how to serve God, but it also had food restrictions, right? Among many things, you couldn't eat pork products, you couldn't eat shell food, and, I don't know for certain what kings ate in 500 BC, but I can tell you, if I'm king, there's bacon at that table, and in my house, I call shrimp bacon of the sea. That's going to be at my table too. And so they say, well, we can take the guess that at the king's table, he probably had food that Daniel didn't want to eat because he was still trying to honor God and follow Torah. And some other people say, well, it also could have been the case that before the king ate his meals, his food would have been through some sort of ritual to dedicate it to different gods. And so, like we see in the New Testament, this is an issue for Christians. It's an issue for the people of God to eat food that's been consecrated for other gods. That could have been it. But really, when you read what's going on in this story, none of that stuff is mentioned. I mean, honestly, when we think about, was it just consecrated to another god? The vegetables would have been too. Did it have something to do with Torah? Well, the Bible doesn't actually say that. And so we can make guesses to maybe that is why or why not, but the truth is the Bible doesn't say that. And so we don't need to go off that. But one thing that we can see when we read this text is that Daniel is concerned about being better than the other people around him. He knows he's being examined. He knows that he's been chosen to serve the king because he's supposed to be the best. And Daniel is concerned about how him and the other Israelites are going to look when the king sees them. And so he says, you're going to give me this meal because it's going to make me better than my competition. And the guy even says, well, I don't know about that. This sounds like something that's going to get me killed. So he says, well, let's stop. And God gives the man compassion to just hear Daniel out. And he says, well, let's test it. Let's see what happens. And after 10 days of eating vegetables and water, these men are leaner and better off than the people eating from the king's table. And so when they're examined, they're seen to be superior. This is really important. And we'll talk about it a little bit more in a second, but let's finish the chapter. This is verse 17. As for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. At the end of the time when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them. And among all of them, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore, they stood before the king. And in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in all his kingdom. And Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus. That last line is incredibly important. Do you know why? If you read through Daniel, you're going to find Nebuchadnezzar is the king right now, but he's not always going to be king. A king will come after him, and a king will come after him, and that king is King Cyrus. King Cyrus is not a Babylonian, he's a Persian. Someday his army is going to come to Babylon, and they're going to do what Babylon did to Jerusalem. He's going to destroy it, and he's going to take over. But notice, kings are going to rise and fall in Babylon, but Daniel will still be there. The man of God will watch kings rise and fall, but he's not going to. Why? Because Daniel began his life on this journey differently than everyone else. What's so interesting, and what I think may become one of the most difficult themes of Daniel as we begin to read it, is Daniel is taken from his home. He's taken from the nation that is considered the family of God, where he was meant to be. The family that's going to take over the whole world and save the whole world. He watched it burn, and he's taken. And when we see this happen in our culture, because we watch movies where this happens all the time, and we know how they're going to end. If this is a 2023 movie, Daniel's going to be in a cell somewhere. He's going to start making friends. He's going to start scheming. Before you know it, he's going to build his own army, and he's going to challenge Nebuchadnezzar. And by the end of the movie, he's going to slay him. And we're going to say, what a good movie. There were explosions, there were bombs, there were helicopters, and Nebuchadnezzar's dead. And Daniel won because he's the man of God. But that's not at all what happens. Daniel says, I'll learn your language, I'll learn your history books, and I'll take your name. Nebuchadnezzar, he'll serve him. He'll serve the next king. He'll serve the next king. This man is not trying to start a war. He is faithful to his new king. What in the world? But because he's a man of God, he doesn't compromise his faithfulness to God. And this is the theme of Daniel. That when we live in a world that's ungodly, when we're trying to be Christians in a world that isn't Christian, the Bible isn't telling us to start building armies. Start stockpiling that ammo. Start, going underground and get ready. No, it's saying, be the best citizen you can be. And notice, that's exactly what Daniel does. He says, don't feed me the good food. Don't feed me the good wine, because I need to be the best citizen I can be. I need to be the best servant I can be to Nebuchadnezzar. And God blesses him. Remember at the very beginning of the story, it makes clear God watched Nebuchadnezzar come. If you read Ezekiel, God warns Israel that this is going to happen. Nebuchadnezzar is not more powerful than God. He didn't do anything God wasn't okay with. He was the hand of God in this moment. And Daniel was taken because of God's plan. It wasn't an accident, and it wasn't an act of Nebuchadnezzar's power. It was actually an act of God's power. And you say, but that's weird. Nebuchadnezzar's an evil guy. He absolutely is. But Israel was also turning evil. Israel was starting to look a lot like Babylon in the way that they treated other nations, in the way that they treated the people of their own nation, the poor and oppressed of their own nation. And God said, I've had enough of it. If you guys aren't willing to serve me, I will find someone else. And Daniel knows that if he's going to serve God, he doesn't need to build an army. He doesn't need to destroy Nebuchadnezzar, because when God's done with Nebuchadnezzar, God has no problem destroying nations. And that's what this chapter just let us know. This guy, Daniel, who's a man of God, he is the only one who will stand through the ages. Nebuchadnezzar is an evil man, and he will fall, but God will bring him down. And the king after him, same thing. And God will bring him down. And King Cyrus, same thing. God will actually end up using the Persians to restore Israel as you follow the story. But Daniel's job is to not overthrow Babylon. Daniel's job is to not assassinate his new king. His job is to be the best citizen that he can be without compromising his faithfulness to God. And what he does here is something he didn't actually need to do. Nothing about eating from the king's table is necessarily wrong, according to this story. Daniel considers it wrong just because it's going to make him worse off. He decides to make an executive decision. He can eat from the king's table, but he decides, if I'm going to be the best citizen I can be, if I'm going to be the best man of God that I can be in the circumstances that I'm in, then I need to stand out. I look at what my peers are doing. I'm looking at the resources God is giving me, and I'm actually going to deny good things because I have something bigger in mind. And so I think what we take away from here is, when do we need to do this? If we're going to be good Christians in 2023, see, Nebuchadnezzar is gone and past. None of us have been taken captives from our homes. None of us have new kings who are saying, you follow me or you die. But the truth is, every day we have choices to make about who we're going to serve. And I encourage you, be like Daniel. Don't try to overthrow our government. I'm fine with that being on record, that your pastor just told you, let's not overthrow the government. I don't think Daniel is telling us to do that. The Bible is not telling us to do that. Jesus is not telling us to overthrow the government. I think here is actually telling us we need to think about our circumstances and how do we live as the best citizens here that we can be. But we also need to be thinking about our higher purpose. At the end of the day, we don't wake up to be good Americans. We can wake up to be good men and women of God. We wake up with our mission to bring God's kingdom into this world, to bring the salvation of Jesus into every moment with us, to bring healing and love to every person we touch. And we need to say, how do I live where I am right here, right now, but never compromise the mission that we have that's bigger? Even if that means we need to give up some things that the Bible says is okay. So what does our culture look like? We're not conquering nations. None of us are seeing news stories of us having just stolen all the relics of a foreign god and bringing them here, right? But instead, we live in a culture that's telling you your primary motivation isn't conquest and political power. Your primary goal should be have fun, right? Every day should be enjoyment. Every day should be better than the next. If you're not having fun, why is life worth living, right? I've told you these stories before of when I was young, my family used to counsel my other cousins and such that while you're thinking about what kind of job you're going to have in the future, as you grow up, you need to think of what kind of fun do you want to have in your life and figure out how to chase that. And the God of the Bible says you've actually got a bigger mission. Like, God has no problem with us living to enjoy life. He has no problem with us having fun. But we can't let our culture, we can't let our world and our society change our higher purpose. We can't let those goals compromise our mission to God. So maybe you're in a situation like so many people are in this world where every Friday night, every Saturday night, every Sunday, you're living for the weekend so you can just go out and party. Now, if you ask me, I know this is controversial, but I get asked a lot. I actually get asked a lot. Can Christians drink alcohol? And I'll tell you right here, right now, I think that's perfectly fine. We have people in the Bible all over the place drinking alcohol. But maybe you're in circumstances where if you're going to stand out as a person of God and everyone around you is living a reckless, crazy life, maybe you need to stop. And you say, well, I don't think the Bible is against it. I don't think the Bible is against eating anything other than vegetables and water. But Daniel realized if he was going to make a difference, he needed to stand out. And maybe if there are people around us who are living lives of destruction and we're going to care for them and we're going to help them see the glory of Christ and the salvation of a world following God, maybe we need to stop drinking alcohol for a while to show these people how the people of God stand out. Maybe everyone around us spends all of their time just watching TV or on their phones. How many of us know people like this, where they're losing connections, they're losing friends and family because they spend every bit of free time glued to a television or glued to a phone? And you say, well, nothing in the Bible really makes it sound like that's wrong. And you know what? I think you're right. I think there are brilliant stories and shows and movies on TV, and they can enhance your life in so many different ways. And you know what? I'm thankful that God gave us cell phones. My wife and I, we recently watched Seinfeld, which was really fun because every season they have a new phone, right? But they're using pay phones. And every time they need to get a hold of someone, they're running and trying to find who has a phone, Are they going to answer? Are they going to not? Did they get the voicemail? Did they not? I'm really glad we have cell phones now. Half of that show isn't a problem anymore because of cell phones. And I think it's a gift from God. But maybe if we're going to stand out in America in 2023 and show the light of Jesus to people who don't know him, to people who might even be against him, maybe we start using our free time differently. Maybe we put our phones down and say, how do I connect with someone? By making eye contact. Maybe we say, instead of spending my whole weekend just watching shows and being lazy, saying, hey, I worked hard all week, I deserve to rest. Yeah, rest is good, but maybe we make time for people who need love and care and the Spirit of God in their life. See what I'm saying? I don't know what this looks like for you, because for all of us, it's going to change on our circumstances. You hear me say this all the time, but it's true. And I think Daniel is encouraging us to be wise and to be discerning and to ask the Spirit, how are we being good citizens of our own community, bringing the light of God, bringing the Spirit of God to the people around us who need him? And that doesn't mean we need to start an army, but it probably means we need to reject things that are perfectly fine for the sake of standing out and for the sake of being different so that we can live for the real higher purpose that we have. Amen. That we might live to bring the light of God to a place that is against him. And we have to wonder, would this world actually be against God if they saw the light of Jesus? Are you showing that light? If you follow Jesus, the same Spirit that was in Jesus and rose him from the dead is in you. Everywhere you go, you can bring the light of Christ to people who have never seen it. Do you stand out? If you will, I understand this is a lot easier to talk about than to do. So let's just take a moment in prayer.